When my father passed away, silence filled the house in a way I had never experienced before. It wasn't just the absence of footsteps or the echo of his voice. It was heavier, deeper, like the walls themselves knew he was gone and mourned with me. I wandered from room to room after the funeral, touching the furniture, staring at his favorite chair, breathing in the faint trace of his cologne that still lingered in the fabric. I thought I would find comfort in those small reminders, but instead they cut deeper, reminding me that I would never hear him call my name again. My stepmother, on the other hand, carried herself through those days like an actress on a stage. At the funeral, her sobs came on cue. Her handkerchief was displayed at all the right moments, and she leaned on sympathetic shoulders as though she had rehearsed the role of grieving widow. But whenever her eyes fell on me, I saw something that didn't match the tears, something cold, sharp, calculating. It was then, though I didn't fully grasp it, that the storm began to gather. The days following his burial blurred together. People came and went, murmuring condolences, promising support that rarely lasted beyond the threshold. My stepmother grew distant, retreating to her bedroom with whispered phone calls that ceased whenever I drew near. Her posture stiffened when I entered her room, her gaze hardened, and though I tried to convince myself it was grief, deep down I sensed something darker. Before we continue, thank you so much for your support. Every like, comment, and view means the world to us. We're on a mission to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and we'd love for you to be part of that journey. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and let's grow together. Now, let's proceed. Then one evening, it became undeniable. She stood in the living room doorway, arms folded tightly, her expression grim. "You need to leave," she said, her voice carrying none of the pretense she had shown to outsiders. At first, I thought I had misheard her. Surely she couldn't mean it. But she repeated herself, slower, firmer. "This house is mine now. You don't belong here." The words struck like a whip, leaving me stunned, staring at her with disbelief. I tried to reason with her, tried to remind her that this was my father's home, that he had raised me here, that every wall carried the story of our family. "You can't just throw me out," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay steady. But she only smirked, her lips curling in cruel satisfaction. "Your father is gone, and with him goes your right to this house. You're not my son, and you never will be. You're just another mouth I don't owe anything to." Her tone was final, dismissive, and it carried the weight of years of resentment she had finally allowed to surface. I realized, in that moment, that I had been naive to believe she would ever see me as family. My father had been the only thread tying us together, and with him gone, she cut it without hesitation. Packing my belongings felt like tearing pieces of myself away from the life I had known. I stuffed shirts into a duffel bag, glancing at the framed photographs on the wall. My father smiling at me when I was a boy, the fishing trips, the birthdays, the small victories he always celebrated with me. Each picture seemed to plead with me not to go, but I had no choice. My stepmother stood by the door, her arms crossed, her satisfaction barely hidden as I walked out carrying the last remnants of my life in that house. The door shut behind me with a hollow finality, and for the first time, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like exile. The streets were cruel to someone carrying grief. I wandered until I found myself in a homeless shelter, a place thick with despair and the stench of too many bodies crammed into too little space. The bunks were stacked, the walls peeling, and the air heavy with muffled cries, coughs, and the occasional outburst of someone who had lost more than I could imagine. The food was bland, barely filling, but hunger was easier to bear than humiliation. Nights were the hardest. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to strangers groan in their sleep, wondering how quickly my life had unraveled. I had gone from being the son of a man I admired to just another forgotten soul tucked into a cot. Each morning I woke with the same thought. Maybe this is where I belong now, discarded, and invisible. And yet, fate has a way of bending when you least expect it. One morning, as I sat hunched over a bowl of watery porridge, the shelter grew quiet. A man in a tailored suit walked in, his polished shoes clicking against the worn floor. His presence was so out of place that every head turned to follow him. He carried a leather briefcase, his eyes sharp, scanning the room until they landed on me. He walked directly to my table, said my name with certainty, and extended his hand. "I'm your father's lawyer," he said. My spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the bowl. The room around me blurred as he opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table, his voice calm, but carrying words that thundered in my ears. "The house is legally yours." I stared at the documents inside, stamped and signed, my father's handwriting on the final page. My heart pounded as the lawyer explained that my father had made sure his will was airtight. The property, the assets, everything had been left to me. He had foreseen the possibility of betrayal and safeguarded me with the law. My stepmother had known all along, the lawyer said, and yet she had cast me out anyway, banking on my silence, on my absence, on my belief that I had no claim. Rage surged in me, but it was tempered by something stronger, purpose. My father had not abandoned me. Even in death, he had fought to protect me. And I realized then that my stepmother's cruelty had not won. The walk back to the house was unlike any other. Each step carried the weight of reclamation. The lawyer strode beside me, his calm demeanor a shield against the storm I knew was coming. When the house came into view, my chest tightened, my breath quickened, and for a moment I felt like a child again, returning home after being lost. I wondered how she would react, what mask she would wear, what excuses she would conjure. But when she opened the door and saw me standing there with the lawyer, her face betrayed everything. The color drained from her skin, her lips parted in shock, her eyes darted from me to the papers in his hand. She stammered, searching for words, but the lawyer spoke first, his tone firm. "Ma'am, according to the will of your late husband, this house and all its holdings legally belong to his child. You have no claim here." She tried to protest, her voice rising in desperation, accusing me of manipulation, insisting she was entitled to the property after all she had sacrificed. But the lawyer remained unmoved, holding up the stamped will as undeniable proof. I stepped into the house, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like mine again. Not because I had forced my way in, but because I was meant to be there. My stepmother's eyes followed me with venom, her pretense of sorrow shattered, her true nature revealed in the flicker of rage across her face. She muttered curses under her breath, but I stayed silent. The truth was louder than her lies, and I no longer needed her acknowledgement. That night, the house felt both familiar and foreign. I walked through each room, touching the furniture, breathing in the air, remembering the sound of my father's voice. But something gnawed at me. Items were missing. Drawers had been emptied. Closets rearranged. It was as though she had been preparing to erase him completely, to scrub every trace of his life until only hers remained. In the study, I found his old desk. A locked drawer caught my eye, one I remembered he had always kept shut. The lawyer had given me a small key from the safety deposit box, and with trembling hands, I slid it into the lock. The drawer opened with a soft click, revealing documents neatly stacked, letters carefully folded, records preserved in my father's meticulous handwriting. I read through them, my pulse quickening with each page. Bank statements revealed attempts she had made to siphon funds. Letters showed her correspondence with distant relatives, plotting ways to consolidate control. Notes in my father's own hand spoke of suspicion, resistance, and his determination to protect me from her grasp. It became clear that my eviction hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment cruelty. It had been a long-laid plan, a betrayal years in the making. And though my father had sensed it, he had beaten her at her own game, leaving safeguards she never knew existed. The next morning, I confronted her. I placed the papers on the kitchen table, watching her eyes widen as she recognized them. She tried denial first, shaking her head, insisting they were forged. But when I pointed to my father's signature, her denial erupted into rage. She screamed, calling me a thief, accusing me of conspiring with the lawyer. Her voice carried beyond the walls, drawing neighbors to the gate. For years she had painted herself as the grieving, faithful widow. But now, in broad daylight, her mask cracked. She lunged at me, clawing for the papers, but stumbled, falling hard to the floor. Gasps echoed from outside. The neighbors saw not a victim, but a woman consumed by greed, unmasked in the most humiliating way possible. And that was when her empire began to collapse. Word spread quickly, through neighbors, through relatives, through the very circle she had courted for years. The story of her deceit traveled faster than she could contain it. Friends who had once supported her began to distance themselves. Relatives whispered about her greed. Banks and officials, alerted by the documents, started scrutinizing her transactions. One by one, the pillars of her carefully built image crumbled until she was left standing in the ruins of her own lies. I didn't have to destroy her. The truth did it for me. Her downfall wasn't my vengeance, it was her own making. I watched as she unraveled. Some days she stormed out, screaming at neighbors who whispered behind their gates. Other days she returned late, her shoulders slumped, her eyes red from tears. Calls that once filled her evenings fell silent. Invitations stopped arriving. She was abandoned by the very world she had clung to, left to stew in the silence she had created. And silence, I learned, can be crueler than any weapon. It forces you to hear your lies echo back until you realize no one believes them anymore. Eventually, she packed her things and left. Not because I forced her out, but because the house had become unbearable for her, a monument to the truth she couldn't erase. I watched her drag her suitcase down the steps, her back rigid, her eyes refusing to meet mine. For a fleeting moment, pity tugged at me. But then I remembered the nights I spent in a shelter bed, humiliated and forgotten, because of her cruelty. Pity turned to steel. She walked away, and I let her go without a word. The house is quiet now, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels alive, filled with the spirit of the man who built it and the justice he ensured for me. I wind the clock on the mantle every evening, the same way my father used to, and each time I hear its steady tick, I think of his words, "This house will always be your home." He was right, and though betrayal tried to steal it from me, truth returned it. I have learned that revenge does not always come with fire or fury. Sometimes it comes softly, through the collapse of lies under their own weight, through the quiet victory of truth standing unshaken. My stepmother's downfall was not my doing, it was hers. I simply held on long enough for the truth to speak louder than her deception. And in the end, that was all it took. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us.